I want to welcome you all, first of all. My name, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Kafani. I'm the director of the Africana Institute here at Essex College. I'm honored to be here in your presence. Who was in the audience? Mama Jeffries, let's give Mama Jeffries a round of applause. Dr. J is in the audience, and Dr. Jeffries as well. And none other than our sister Frederica Bay is in the audience, so we want to honor all of them who are here and helping us to do all the great things that we do, that we, I always say we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us and made a way for us to be able to do what we do. And, those three people for me have continually helped to do so. Dr. Jeffries always talks about that his wife was the one who was in Africa before him in the 60s. And so that when we look at the legacy of someone who's been doing what they do, being in the struggle, changing and transforming the reality of those around us since the 60s, it lets you know that we're in the midst of those who are being looked at in a way that we may not have thought that we need to be looking at. We're in the midst of those who exemplify what those of us who come after them have been striving to do and should be striving to do. And modeling for like the young folks who just came into the room, what the young folks need to be doing. We want them to be the next leaders who provide the foundation for how we do these things and why we do these things. And so that it's with great respect and honor that we're able to do so. We start all that we do. We move the move the program around a little bit today, but we're going to take a step back. We're going to get ready to invite our first panel up. And our first panel is on Buddhism. We have two great brothers to come and talk about that today. But before we move on there, we're going to pour libations. We'll do an abbreviated version of that because I follow the footsteps of Dr. Jeffries, and so therefore our libations usually are the program. So today we're going to do an abbreviated version. I won't even pour the whole bottle of water. So as we begin, though, I want to first do what we must do, and that is that I ask for all of those elders who are in the room. Anybody who is over the age of 60, if you would please stand. Let's give our if you're over 65, please remain standing. If you're over 70, please remain standing. Let's give them a round of applause. If you're over 75, please remain standing. If you're over 80, please remain standing. If you're over 85, please remain standing. Let's give our mother a round of applause. Thank you for your presence today. Mama, I ask you if we have permission to begin. Okay, thank you very much. Let's give her another round of applause. It's always a pleasure to have our elders in the audience. They help us to understand the direction that we must go. I always say that we sit at the feet of the elders, and we sit there because the elders, even though we may not always agree with them and how they do what they do, that they have lessons to learn, that if we sit silently at their feet, then there's so much to be learned, and we must be thankful of those lessons. Ashe? Ashe. So we pour libations here today. We are recognizing those who came before us, and so as we pour libations, we know that we come from the beginnings of the beginnings of the beginnings, and that our beginnings start with the thought in the air of our beginnings. That is, that we know that the words, the ideas, that we are a collection of billions of years from the dust and particles that we came to our physical manifestation here today. and to some point in the future we cannot imagine, that we are connected to that future, to this present, and to that past. Ashe? This life is one of remembering, and the more that we understand that we're remembering those things that have gone by, that we make that connection to our ancestors who are living within us and around us. And so those living ancestors are us. We are them. We speak the words that they endeavored for us to speak. We embody the actions that they hoped that we would fulfill. And so that part of our responsibility is to recognize the legacy that we're building on and the legacy that we are leaving behind. Ashe? And so as we do all these things, we do them knowing that those who came before us gave us the ideas about writing, about spirituality, about architecture and art, gave us the ideas about movement and dance and drumming, gave us ideas about building and how to live a life that is fulfilled by the things that we do, and making sure that we're journeying on this path in a way that is uplifting not just to us but to those around us. Ashe? And so as we live that life, as we carry forward the traditions and legacies of those that came before us, we must speak their names, and so that we call their names to bring into our present space the energy of those who came before us. The life that they breathe, we want to rebreathe out here today by calling their names. So I ask you all to help us here as we call their names. Please call their names now. Ashe. Ashe. Ashe, come on now. Ashe. Ashe, Ashe. Ashe. Yes, Ashe. Yashantima. Ashe. Ashe. Ashe.
Thomas Sankara.
Ashe. 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 Yes, we want to call both your family and our elevated ancestors. So make sure you call them as well. If you haven't called somebody in your family, make sure your family is present here with us today.
My cousin Bamboo.
Ashe. Ashe. Nancy Franks. Ashe. 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 They transform the ether in the air, and we thank you for helping us to help them to understand that we recognize their presence. That we have opened the door and created space for our ancestors to bless this space, so that the energy that comes from the stage, from the audience, and from around is that which is positive and uplifting. That we know that anything that was negative that was here before has been forced out by the presence of the words of their names that you evoked. That Malcolm X has looked around and said, we know the enemies are around us, but we have pushed them someplace other than where they're going to be here today. Ashe? And so as we do so, we know that the brothers and sisters who invented all the things that we use today, the ones who came through Middle Passage, both the European and the Arab slave trade, and any others that we may not even know of, all those who have created ways to build families, those who have helped us to be better brothers and sisters in the face of the reality of the things that we've done that may not have been the ways that we wanted them to be. But we are here today, and we're transforming that world. And so for all those whose names have gone unspoken, we say Ashe. 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 Thank you. Now, I'm going to bring two brothers to the table, to the stage, and ask them to join us here. Brother Shaka George and Brother Joshua Rosenbaum. If you could please join us on stage. Let's give them a round of applause. So, please. I'm going to ask them to give a little bit of their background. I wasn't able to put that in the program today, but we're going to ask them to say a few words about who they are, about the tradition. We look at this because, as they're coming up and getting ready to present, I want to give some context real quick. So this is a program that we started, the African Spirituality Conference, started 4 years ago. And the idea behind it is that we as Africans have a diversity of experiences. Some may be traditionalists, some may be Muslims, some may be Christians, some may be Buddhist or from the Ifa tradition, from the Akan tradition, so many different traditions, the Kemetic tradition that we come from and that we share with the community or that we participate in. But we oftentimes have fear or reticence about coming to the table and having a dialogue about the diversity of who and what we are spiritually. And so the idea here was to say, well, I'm a Pan-Africanist first. And so as a Pan-Africanist, the idea is that there's nothing that we do that doesn't overlap. There's nothing that we do that doesn't have tentacles in our past and around the world. It's sometimes we think that they don't have a relationship, but it's our responsibility to figure out where the relationship is. It's our responsibility to figure out how the things that we see that look different from us, that look like it's oppositional, that's not oppositional. That look like it may not have something to do with something else, but it has much to do with the things that we're doing. And so if we look deeply into what we do, we find out that our connections are ever present. And our connections are fluid in ways that we may not even think of. And so I want us to think about the ways that they're fluid and the beauty behind all the different ways that we celebrate and look to our ancestors and to our spiritual foundations and how that propels us to the next level. So without further ado, I turn the mics over to Brother Joshua Rosenbaum and Brother Shaka George. Let's give them another round of applause.
Hi, good afternoon. And I thank my brother Dave for inviting me over to share a little bit of my experience in the Buddhist tradition with you. And I thank all of you here for being here. My name is Shaka George. I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I was raised, I guess, Catholic, but I was initiated into the Vodou tradition by my mother at the age of 9. And then from there, being Christian in the Catholic Church, I went to those many sacraments, many tradition. But when I came to the US, the short version of it, I started to practice martial arts, and then I studied Kemetic, and I went to the Yoruba tradition. And I started studying the African tradition over here. And Dr. Jeffries was one of my teachers at City College in the 80s. And one thing I remember that it says that in order for you to understand who we are, you have to be at the right mind, And he introduced us to Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, and all these great people that has written and set the way for us to study. And one of the things I always kept with me is that we need to be in our right mind, because to this point, we're still suffering from the Willie Lynch syndrome of fear all the time, especially the fear of who we are. In the Buddhist tradition, most people ask me, is it a religion? What is it? The Buddhist tradition actually is 3 parts. There's Buddhist religion, Buddhist philosophy, and also Buddhist psychology. And the main study is studying the mind. When we go in our practice, it's about the mind. It's not about nobody else, nothing else. It's about the mind. So giving I'll leave it over here for now, and then we'll get into a little bit later. But my study began, really get into Buddhism when I was studying Kupagani and Gumi with Mfudisi Hassan and Fundi Shakara, who introduced me actually to the Buddhist tradition. And from there I took my vow in 2000, vow of Buddhism and vow of Bodhisattva. And then my practice has been ever since. That's a short version of it.
Okay. Greetings, peace, hotel. My name is Joshua. I've been practicing Nichiren Buddhism for 9 years. My background is, as far as spirituality, I practice Kemetic spirituality with Ososet, Dagra tradition with Malagoma Somé, and I never thought that I would be practicing Buddhism as an African, but I was searching for something that was not only theoretically on point, but could really transform my life. And I also wanted to practice with a group of people. So I thought, I miss being able to meditate. I used to travel to Brooklyn, and where Osar said was located, and that became a little bit challenging living in New Jersey. So I said, I know Buddhists meditate, so let me find some Buddhists who meditate. And I went to an introductory meeting, and they were chanting, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and I chanted before, and I said, okay, I know I can do this, I'll try. And what they told me was that I can transform my life through this practice. I don't have to believe in anything. If I chant 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, chant 5 or 10 minutes in the evening, write down 3 goals based on that, then that could work. At that point, I was 39 years old, a husband, father of 2, and I had read a whole lot. I've studied a lot. I'm surprised that I'm sitting here speaking to all these elders who I studied. Dr. Jeffries, you came and spoke at my bookstore, Netukisa Books and Gifts in South Orange. Many people came in. Sister Frederica Bay was here also. I think my daughter went to the first school there. She's 21 years old now. She was three and a half when she entered. So I'm looking at all these elders. I thought I was speaking to more young people, but I appreciate your presence and everything because you helped lift me up and helped to make me who I am. So I'm a reader. That's why I opened the bookstore. But like I said, I needed something that was practical for all of my life, that would help me in every aspect of my life, help me to be better in my career as an educator, to improve my family life with my wife and my daughters. And so, they said this practice was based on actual proof, meaning that if you transform from within, then the environment will reflect your transformation. Thank you. And they call, in our tradition, they call that human revolution. So that attracted me. And I said, let me try and see if that could work. And I wrote down more than 3 goals. I think I wrote down 50 different goals, because it was a lot that I needed to change. And what it did was, it had me really look at myself completely. When we chant in the morning and the evening, we have to look at the complete part of ourselves, everything. And basically what it's saying is that every single person is a Buddha, meaning every single person can be enlightened, can bring forth great wisdom, great compassion, great courage, and it's based on our practice. So ultimately, I wanted to experience enlightenment. I read about it, but I said, I want to experience this. And the promise was enlightenment. The promise is also absolute happiness, that no matter what occurs in my life, I can be happy and I can be victorious in any aspect of my life. And as somebody who is an educator, who is determined to fight for the liberation of African people, not only on a level, a macrocosm level, but on a microcosm with my family, with my students. I knew I had to make myself into a better person and continually transform into a better person. So that's what this Buddhism has done for me. That's why I continue to practice. I wake up early in the morning, every morning, and I chant because it says, we are one with our environment. So I know as a teacher that if I'm right, my students are going to be right. They might, bug out with other teachers, but if I'm correct, if my spirit is right, then you can see the difference. So it's obvious. So again, it's based on actual proof I've seen in my life, the transformation, and that's why I continue to practice Nichiren Buddhism.
One of the things that we need to understand is that who we are never changed as an African people. Being from the Vodun tradition is not religious, but is a practice of a people. Yoruba is a practice of a people. People are Yoruba, people are Akan. So therefore, that type of stuff never leaves us. No matter where we are or where we go, whatever religion we are, we're still Vodun, we're still Yoruba, we're still black. So the problem becomes when we try to move away from that. There's become a conflict between the self and essence. Right? The essence of who we are, that's who we are. But when the self takes over, there's contradiction. So we're always in conflict with ourselves. There's always a fight. So becoming a Buddhist, there was never a contradiction of who I am. Being raised in the African tradition, that's who I am, even though I practice. The thing that attracted me more to the Buddhist tradition, it gives me a way of understanding of who I am. We practice, when I sit, my life has been for the last 15 years, I do my work, I go home, I practice. Sometimes I sit for 2 hours at the most, and then I practice martial art, then I chant, and so that's been my life for the last 10 or so years. That was my practice, trying to understand my true nature, right? So Buddhism, the preaching of I am from the Kagyu lineage. I took my vow up in the monastery in Woodstock over 15 years ago, and taking a Buddhist vow is not an outward show of Buddhism. It's a shift of consciousness. Because when I first went to the monastery and I was going to take my vow, I think it was going to be this big thing. But all it is just a snap of a finger. It's intention. Becoming Buddhist is about intention. So ever since then, I've been practicing. So there was nobody to tell me what you're supposed to do, that. That was my intention, to just practice. Being from the Kagyu lineage, also being a martial artist from the Chan Buddhism, what you call Zen. The preaching is very simple. Buddha is mind, mind is Buddha. Mind is emptiness, and Buddha is emptiness. And when the teachers they tell you that you can go listen to all the teachers in the world, read all the books in the world, but after you finish, go sit on your cushion. That's where you'll find the answer. Because being with ourselves, understanding the nature of our mind, and seeing where our mind goes into everyday life, make us truly be in touch with everything else around us. Right? We don't judge. Right? So non-attachment, there's no attachment between what's going on around us, and then we judge it, and our mind just stays with it. Right? We practice, and we call it practice, because it never really realized, We practice sitting with ourselves. We practice being mindful with ourselves and other people. At any moment of the day and time, you should be aware of what's going on through your mind. The thing that's makes you mad, the things that makes you glad, being aware, being considerate. The practice of Buddhism, even though it has first thing is that there's four noble truths. Life is suffering. So as long as you're in this life, that you're going to suffer, right? And the cause of suffering, which is the nature of our mind, right? And the cessation of suffering, how do we not stop the suffering, but deal with the suffering itself and the path? Once you choose that path, right, you become very sensitive to yourself, become very sensitive to your thinking, right? What makes you suffer, right? Because other people cannot make you suffer unless you are attached an emotion to what they do and what they say, right? Once you become attached to whatever is happening around you, then you begin to suffer. So the path of, like my brother say, of liberation, or we call it the path of enlightenment, is understanding that we are part of this world, we are part of this universe, and that whatever happens is in our control, how we react to it. We might not have any control to everything else outside of us, but we have to control how we react to things around us. It is what it is, and recognize it for what it is, and just move on beyond. That's the whole practice of Buddhism, trying to move beyond the everyday pettiness or whatever happened, understanding how you feel about it and how you react to everything going around us. Become more aware. The same thing goes in the practice of Tai Chi or martial arts. You become aware of your movement. You become aware of your space, your time. You become aware of every little nuance in your body when you practice. That's the true practice of Tai Chi. Become totally aware of the nuance of your body and become to calm the mind and being in the present moment.
Yeah, one thing I love about Nichiren Buddhism is every obstacle is an opportunity to bring forth my Buddha nature. So a lot of times, most of us, especially when we're a little bit younger, when an obstacle comes into our lives, we run from it, we try to hide, but really what it's telling us is that is part of our karma. It's, when we say we're one with the environment, anything that comes into our lives represents our karma, our cause and effect. Cause and effect from this lifetime, from previous lifetimes, and that represents our karma. And the best way to transform karma that I found is through practicing this Buddhism. So before, when I had issues, I tried to sweep it under the rug. That doesn't work for my life. It hasn't worked. That's why, again, when I was 39, I said, okay, I need to do something. I'm 40 years old almost, and I'm still dealing with the same issues over and over. So what the Buddhism taught me was not only that you can see it, you can be aware of exactly what it is, but also you can use it to bring value into your life. You can embrace it. And by doing so, it doesn't cause great suffering. And I think that was a big part of the teaching. We suffer. And people suffer for different reasons. One person's suffering is different than the other person's suffering. Which says that it's not about what's outside, it's about what's within. And it says, okay, it's like your own specific life lesson plan that you brought here to learn and to grow from. So it becomes a wonderful opportunity when these obstacles come up in my life that I don't have to run, I face it head on, and my life grows from that obstacle. I'm not trying to hide from it. I'm not trying to escape from it. I think, we tend to do those things as human beings, but knowing that I'm a Buddha and I have a Buddha nature means that I can joyfully challenge that and be victorious every time. Not sometimes, every single time I can be victorious. And that's what I love, about this, because there's some challenges I face that I believe, man, I'm not gonna be able to win over this. But I know with true Buddhist practice, is victory or defeat, is winning or defeat. There's no in between. So that's the approach that I take in my life, which means that I'm gonna win in life no matter what, whether it's with my marriage, whether it's with my career, whether it's with my children, whether it is, any aspect of my life. I know that when I truly practice, on a daily, consistent basis, then no matter what, I'm going to win.
So we often refer to the practice, and it is a practice. Every single day, every single moment of your life is a practice, a practice of being aware, a practice of becoming a better person, discovering your Buddha nature. Even sometimes somebody yelling, screaming at you, not being caught up into that. Something happened, not being caught up into that. See it for what it is and move on. When I sit on my cushion, people call it meditation, but we call it sitting. And that's all it is, because meditation implies you trying to do something. And when we sit, we just sit. We sit with ourselves, with our mind. We observe everything that comes in, and we let it go. There's no attachment. There's no judgment. We see what comes in, we let it go. How we react to it. Because one of my first practice into Buddhism is on death and dying. So a meditation on death and dying, first of all, you start by seeing your worst enemy dying, and you work close until your own death, where you have to write your own eulogy. So to be able to deal with the impermanence of life and who you are, to be able to understand, the loss of a loved one, the loss of yourself, because when you're in the cushion, you're thinking about something, you get the same reaction as if it was actually real. The mind cannot differentiate whether it's real or not. But once you think about it, you get that same reaction. Yes, you cry. Yes, you tend to be tense. Your body becomes very agitated. So having a reflection on death and dying and trying to write your own eulogy make you faced with the reality of the mortality of life, the impermanence. And Buddhists talk a lot about impermanence, Everything is impermanent, but sometimes we not being able to face the truth of impermanence, we try to forget about it. We try to move on or deny it. But when you sit on your cushion, the whole idea is that you think of that reality. You think of that, the reality of what's going on around you with your family, friends, and you think about it and you let it go. So the whole idea is always a practice, because we always let whatever comes to mind, let it pass through. When you sit on your cushion, you don't hold on to anything. You don't hold on to whatever comes to mind. We just watch it, observe it, and sometimes we label it. Label it as fear, label it as happiness, label it as thinking. We just label it. We sit with ourselves and just let everything go. That's the place you have the opportunity to face yourself. Because I find that a lot of people cannot be with themselves for too long, because that's why you got TV, you got radio, you got all this stuff around you. And some people even, when you say solitary, they go crazy because the mind will take you places you never think of before. Things that happened way back when, or fear of the outcome of something. So if you're not able to take back your mind, understand your nature, and also be okay with it. The dark side of yourself, that's part of who you are. Our martial art is about the yin and yang, the dark and the light. It's all part of us, right? And again, like I said, we're still dealing with the effect of fear, because the fear of ourselves, the fear of others, the fear of anything around us. So in order to deal with the fear, we have to embrace the fear and just go beyond that. That's a practice, as a Christian.
Oh, sure. I'm gonna take the liberty of the mic from the audience, and I want to see if we have an opportunity to entertain a couple of questions, and as we get ready to keep moving forward. Is that okay with you, brothers?
That's right. Can I
Yes,
comment
please.
briefly on that?
If you have questions, can you line over here, please?
And what Brother Shaka said was very profound, in being able to really face yourself and face aspects of yourself that you really don't want to see. That you, again, if you don't see those parts of yourself, then you're really cutting yourself off from enlightenment. And I think it's very important to have the courage to see those parts. And that's one thing, again, I love about Buddhism, is that I know I can look at those parts that I have to change, the dark aspects, or the things we don't like about ourselves, because they again offer opportunities to bring forth enlightenment. So everything can bring forth enlightenment. There's a concept that says at any given moment we can bring forth our Buddha nature. And I think that's what he's talking about as well. At any given moment, there's choices that can come out of our life. And if we have a very high life condition, then those things that in the past could make us angry, or we believe could make us angry or upset or sad or suffer, they don't have that power, because our life condition is high. So we've brought out our Buddha nature over that condition. We see it for what it is, and we understand that it's really a reflection of what's inside. So when I do my morning chanting, and my evening, I look at everything. I'm not afraid to look at all aspects, because I know ultimately that's going to help me bring out my Buddha nature. Asha.
Hey, Joshua.
Peace. What's going on?
It's been a minute.
My brother.
Yeah.
It's like a family reunion.
Yeah. So I have two questions for you. Okay, the first question, so I have two 13-year-olds and a 15-year-old, right? So Joshua, you being an educator, number one, how would you explain Buddhism in a way so that they can get it? And what recommendation out of your Buddha practices do you suggest for them? So there are two 13-year-olds and one 15-year-old. And then I have another question. Well, two more questions after that. I won't hog the mic, family, I promise.
That's funny, because our children were children of the sun when they were babies. So my daughter's 15. And, this Buddhism teaches that our karma is connected to our family members. So the most important thing we can do is transform our own karma, is to do our own spiritual work, because that'll be reflected. They're looking at us. And once, my children were hesitant about Buddhism, until they really started seeing change in me, and I have, my oldest is gonna be 21, and she's at Howard University now, and for the first time, she really started picking up Buddhism. She's practicing herself now. And I would ask her to come out to meetings. There's youth meetings that we would come out to, or I say, come, chant with daddy a little bit. And she sometimes yes, sometimes no. But ultimately it was my transformation, that one day she's like, Daddy, I wanna practice, I wanna take this serious. And it was, at that point we were a little concerned about her. And this has been the best thing. But what I do, I invite my children out. I know for our Buddhist practice, there are youth organizations. There was just a big youth festival at Prudential Center where my daughter was able to sing. She's a singer, my youngest. So she got involved in that way. And, seeing other youth, practice helps her as well. But again, I think the most important thing that we can do as a father or mother, is transform our own karma. And this Buddhism says when you start to change your karma, it affects your family 7 generations in the past, 7 generations into the future.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is, on my journey, right, growing up in a Dominican household, raised Catholic, wasn't really with the church thing. Then I became a 5%er. And, just on my journey, experiencing different spiritual systems, I've been in Kemet with Baba Ashra Kwesi, all of that. On the low, I've always hid the fact that I was so attracted to Buddhism. It just felt right. But I rejected it because it wasn't the typical African form of spirituality, right? So I just wanted to know, studying the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I know who the original man is, right? And I know that the African presence is all over the world, right? Like Dr. Khaled said, right? So have you ever felt, like I almost feel guilty, for lack of a better word, for loving Buddhism and never really totally committed to it because I'm like, this isn't African. So I want to know, like, what do you have to say to that? Did you experience that? Do you have any form of, a book that you suggest? Go ahead.
Yes, definitely within the practice, because I'm coming from the same schools you're coming from, I had to question, like, am I leaving my African culture? Actually, I spoke to a brother who helped me, and basically he said, you need to study, and study this Buddhism, and you'll find out that it's rooted in Africa, and also that understand, the Lotus Sutra, which is the teaching that Nichiren Buddhism is based off of. The lifespan chapter, which is the 16th chapter, it basically states the historic Buddha that everybody kind of looks up to and thinks that he found enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. In his statement in the lifespan chapter, he says he's always been a Buddha. He's always been. You could go back so many millions of years, he's always been a Buddha. And we know that, like you said, the original man comes from Africa, so that tells me that we were Buddhas. And all the word Buddha means is enlightened one. That's all it means. It doesn't mean Asian. It means enlightened one. That's it. And although it's been somewhat co-opted by the media to look like it's, about Chinese monk going on the mountain somewhere, meditating for hours. Really, Buddhism is daily life. Buddhism is every single moment of life and how we live our lives. That's the real practice of Buddhism. It's not escapism. You like you said, you're a father of three. Buddhism hit four. More power to you.
That's the practice, right?
Yeah, no doubt. So that's, to be the best father that you can be is Buddhism. You're practicing, whether you know it or not, when you bring out the best part of yourself. And so for me, I practice this Buddhism because I know I needed something to help me on a daily basis. You talk about children. I felt like I was losing my daughter at 15. I didn't know about teenage daughters. I didn't know that, they can start acting differently, and yeah, so I said, I need to get my daughter. And with Nichiren Buddhism, it says you can chant about anything in your life. So I was chanting about creating a stronger relationship with my daughter. And, we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. The Myoho part is the mystic law of the universe. And it basically says that when you practice correctly, you can bring these things into your life in a way that maybe you might not see. So at the same time, and it's a chant for whatever you want in your life. That's another thing I love about this practice. I was also chanting to find her a good soccer team, because she played, she was serious. And so the team ended up being in Hartford, Connecticut. I didn't plan that, but we had to drive up for 2 to 3 hours, 3 times a week, 4 times a week. We had to talk. So this Buddhism says every prayer is answered. Every prayer is answered. So in our talking, and not only one, she found a top 10 team in the nation, but 2, what's more important, we were able to connect, and it was based on me looking at myself and saying, what do I need to change about myself first? What do I need to change to make this more powerful, a stronger relationship? Because the Buddhism I practice says we take 100% responsibility for our lives. There's nothing outside that has power over our victory in life or not. So it was transformational, and again, like I said before, it's based on actual proof. So here was an actual proof of my Buddhist practice and being able to forge a much stronger relationship through me changing from within, and also having these conspicuous benefits of her being able to play on a great team and have a great relationship.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the two of you to kind of give kind of closing remarks as we get ready to move into the next panel.
Okay.
So if you could use this opportunity for that, take like 4 or 5 minutes.
And in other words, as far as Buddhism is concerned, growing up in Haiti, when the martial arts were always the thing, and on Sundays they'll give you money to go to the movies, and Shaolin Kung Fu was at its height. And I always admire the Buddhist monks and the peace you see in their eyes, the peace within. But I never thought about Buddhism until I was introduced to it by my Kupagani teacher that gave me a small book called Shambhala, The Path of the Warrior. And from that point on, that changed my life. Because after reading it, understanding the path of the warrior, like you said, it's a lonely path, not because you're alone, but only you know you're calm. Only you know what you're going through, your level of understanding. So ever since I got that book, I never looked back. I've been practicing ever since. So the path of the practice is always about yourself, not everybody else. The path of the practice is about understanding the nature of your mind and trying to go beyond whatever that was instilled into your mind, the belief system, to get rid of that and get in touch with essence. Essence is the true being of who you are.
Also, one thing that part of Nichiren Buddhism is we practice for ourselves and we practice for others. There's no way I can be absolutely at peace and happy if others are not. So it teaches us that we have to reach out to other people, which is what they call the Bodhisattva way. It teaches us that, you know, everyone has a Buddha nature. And it's based on experience. So I'll share a quick experience. I had a neighbor who lived underneath me when I first started my practice, who was cursing, angry. Every night I heard him cursing out his girlfriend. The seniors in my Buddhist practice said, pray for his happiness, chant for his happiness. I said, that guy's never gonna be happy. You know, this is not gonna work. They said, just chant for his happiness. See him happy, chant for him, you know, trust in the process. So I said, okay, no problem, I'll do that. And I chanted, and I continued for probably 2 or 3 months. This guy, still, I didn't see anything. And eventually, the argument stopped. Eventually, it was quiet, and I heard him downstairs reciting prayers, and I said, okay, maybe this is changing him. And then a couple weeks later, you know, I continued chanting, and I came home from a Buddhist meeting, and my daughter said, Daddy, the man downstairs was cursing at me. So I said, oh wow, okay. Immediately, my old mindset was going to be, I'm going to go down there and help this guy out, you know, in a physical way. So I went down, knocked on the door, and he opened the door, and you can see he was visibly shaking because he knew he was wrong. But with my Buddhist practice, I was able to connect with his heart because I had been chanting for his happiness. And we ended up talking for probably an hour, and after that, this guy, he changed, and he became somebody who wasn't always angry, always screaming. And what it tells is, what you bring into a space, if you can connect with somebody's heart, that can transform. So, you know, one of the goals of Buddhism is world peace by helping to transform people, because we know it's people who control systems, people, so, and we know that even as oppressed people, as African people, that we've taken on some of the psychology of our oppressors. And so we need to do work, and we need to do work right with the people we face. The Buddhism says you do work with the person who's right in front of you at the time. You know, so he was right in front of me. And in my past, I would just ignore him or, you know, do the other part, knock him out. But this Buddhism said, no, you have to face him with, you know, your heart, your spirit, and bring forth Buddha nature, because he has Buddha nature also. He ended up taking some books from me, and after a point I realized, you know, I didn't hear the arguments. I heard peace, and when I saw him outside, I saw a guy who had a smile on, who was at peace. You know, so it's about not only transforming our lives, but helping the other people in our lives as well. I think that's a critical point, that a real spiritual practice affects all those around us as well. Thank you.
From the audience, and what we have here on stage, that we have really some insightful and questioning things in our community. And as the day goes on, we're going to see the ways in which these things are more connected. And I encourage you to basically to write down your questions, or feel free to have questions. We're going to try to entertain as many as we can. But at this point, we're going to ask them to, we're going to switch rails. So thank you very much again, brothers. Appreciate you. You also see the connectedness because both of them have been on other spiritual paths in addition to Buddhism. It's not just one thing. And that's just one of the things this whole thing is about. As we move on to the next panel, we're going to be talking about building a family lineage, a spiritual lineage. So first of all, we're going to have Olore Baba Ifakarade. If you can give him a round of applause, please come join us. And one of his students, Baba Akinkube Oduwole Akarade. So that as they come and join us, Baba Akarade is also a professor here at Essex County College. He has several books, two books that I know of that are on your tradition. He also has novels. He is a drummer. His family has a gymnastics facility in East Orange. He is a Renaissance brother, and we're glad to have him here. Let's give him another round of applause. Baba Akinkube both of them are Babalas. Baba Akinkube is a brother who has been working here in the tradition, in the community for a long time. He comes here with his lovely family today, so we thank him for coming. I want to give them an opportunity to give a little more insight and background to their traditions. But the point of this discussion is really to talk about how and what does it mean to build a family lineage in the African spiritual tradition, and how that's done, and you'll see through them how that's done and what that means. Thank you very much, brothers.
Greetings, everyone. It's good to see so many familiar faces, so many people who have seen myself over the years. And I apologize for running out of the room at an opportune moment, but there was a reason for that. You talk about lineages. I am here and honored to sit at the right hand of the man who's responsible for these elecades being on my neck. The man who's responsible for putting my feet upon his path. And so for me, just to be able for us to display ourselves in this manner gives a reflection of what is needed in order for us to establish lineages. And when we talk about family, it is not only family in blood, but as I have been taught and as we are living even now, family in spirit. And I ran out of the room for a specific reason, because this book, I just had to get a copy. I didn't bring mine, I'm sorry. So I had to get this one. And this book is so very important. It's the Handbook of Yoga Religious Concepts, written by Olore Baba Ifakarade. This is the book that got me started in this faith. There's a whole lot of a backstory to this book and my relationship to it. And I write about that in my book. But this is what got me started. I have been on a search for a number of years. My search began at the age of 14, when I started to realize that I needed something greater than myself to better myself. And in that search, I come to find out sometime later the exploration of religion and almost becoming a Baptist minister myself. But making some different choices, those choices put me here in New Jersey, and the search continued. That search went from Islam to Buddhism to, and I'm sitting here and I see elders in this room who are unaware that they were present in places where my awakening began. And while I was studying Buddhism, I simply made a request. And that request was, I want to be African. Because what I realized was that I had done everything possible to absorb the American side of what we were calling ourselves at the time as African American. I did that. I was doing that. But the African side, I had no knowledge, I had no realization, no knowledge, anything. And I write in my writings that when I thought of the image of an African priest, I thought of a very dark man with a black Catholic attire on with the collar. That's my image of an African priest. And no other image at all, none. But all that changed. So I want to turn the mic over because I don't want to talk too long. However, from these experiences, there are direct, specific things that happen that will cause you to establish a lineage. And whether we codify it or not, chances are, if you're dedicated, you're doing it already.
I love you, everyone. Give homage to the ancestors, to our teachers, those who have planted the seeds of consciousness within us, to them I say prophetic form. It's important to grasp a concept of family from an understanding that the term is anthropologically defined. The term is the basis of a cultural definition. What's family and accepted as family in one land and at one time may not be the same definition and embracing of the family unit in another culture at another given time. And Dr. Kubek was very on point in stating that when we look to see our reflection, how much of us do we actually lay eyes on, lay senses on? If we're looking for religion, what is there in front of us to embrace? What is there in front of us to understand? If we look into the priestly calling, what is there for us to embrace? What is there for us to walk with? And when we look at family, what is there to embrace? What is there to understand? And what is there to pass on? For the most part, and I say this with some hesitation because it is a hypothesis, it is an opinion based on my study, that we have been somewhat slighted in terms of how we view family. We have been somewhat taken down a road of your interpretation of family is not the real interpretation of family. And then that lends over to your interpretation of good is not the real interpretation of good. And it goes all the way up, since we're dealing with spirituality here today, your interpretation of God is not a correct interpretation. So now the connection between the self, the family, the thought processes, the wisdom systems, the creative aspects and dimensions of our cultural reality has been splintered. War, famine, disease, enslavement, incarceration, miseducation, all of the negatives that strip our perception of self and continuation of self. Bit by bit, generation by generation. And even though it may seem like we're stronger on the outside, many of our people, the vast majority of our people, are still struggling with crisis of identity on many planes of existence. And if we talk about lineage, and we are talking about lineage, then it becomes crystal clear that we have to establish what that definition is. what that means to us. Draw a little analogy for you. Doing some studies on the power of the dollar. Okay. All research shows that the dollar circulates within the African community 6 hours. 6 hours. That circulation of money is almost non-existent. Now, compared to other groups, weeks, even months, before that dollar exchanges hands with someone outside of the group. Why? Because the people in those groups take family, take their beliefs, their thought factors, their structures, and their lineage to say, as many times as that dollar stays here in terms of time, I'm not building a present with it, I'm building a future with it. Okay? The dividends and the profit margins, they just don't come to satisfying the present. They're making money, drawing interest, not only for the present, but for the future. And I use the money because it's tangible. Okay? I use the money analogy because we can all relate to that. But I question if we see how devastating that reality is, and then when we compare it to the knowledge that truthfully must be cycled in our community. The knowledge of self, the knowledge of Ifa, the knowledge of the impact of Orisha, the knowledge of various other religions that have grown from African soil. Then we say, as long as we can keep that information circulating within our community, as long as we cycle it, not recycle it, but cycle it, we're doing so for our lineage. We're doing so for the continuation of our people, and more so the consciousness of our people. It's been 16 to 20 generations of being torn down in terms of family structure. Going through periods where if it's not a nuclear family, then it's not really a family. That's something that is not seen as right by God. I mean, really. Okay? Now, say if our tradition was polygamous. All the questions of, well, is that a sexual statement? Or if a man can have more than one wife, how come a woman can't have more than one husband? It all kind of gets twisted and turned into what we've been conditioned and turned into accepting as real and believing. Peeling back the layers to say, well, maybe there was a reason. Maybe there was a reason outside of a quote-unquote Judeo-Christian and Islamic kind of statement to the world. But Judeo, polygamous, Islamic, polygamous, okay? Christianity, they might not want to accept it, but there are various levels of polygamy. So, and again, I'm just kind of drawing analogies here in terms of what we take into our minds and what we've been formed as a concrete reality. And then what do we pass on to our children? Too often, well, I don't want to have my child learn too much about this whole African thing. What do you mean this African thing? We're African people. It contradicts the forward movement of our people. We have to be Christian. We have to be other than African. And for survival reasons, I kind of get it. Okay? I kind of get it. But we be free now. For sure. We can make these choices. We can make these choices, and not just for the moment, but for the eternal. For the eternal. And it may not be our children by blood, as Baba Akakube stated. We're kindred spirit. And that kindred spirit makes us family. It makes us family. See, what a person thinks is one thing. Their bloodline, that's one thing. Okay? Family is not just dictated by bloodline. My wife and I, we're not joined by blood, but when we join, we become family. Now, in the real world, where there's rape, incest, war-torn situations, that woman may bear the child of her abuser, but then we can't just lump it together and say, oh, well, they're family, because they now share a bloodline. So family goes beyond blood. Family goes beyond different thoughts. Family goes beyond different beliefs. Family is about embracing and acceptance. And acceptance. I accept you as family. And therefore, based on the premise of O do be found, our sacred scripture, there comes one word, Ashuwada. Ashuwada. The being together of a people who exist for the sake of existence. We cannot continue to exist if we don't have a lineage. To exist for, to exist because, and to accept why we are here right now in the present. So I'm going to leave it at that. I feel as though I must. But I would really like for you to consider, when you reflect upon words like lineage and family, what is it that you really see? And why is it that you see it that way? Because if we're going to move into making this a concrete as opposed to an abstract statement, then we need to be sure. You know, we need to have dialogues like this. We need to have panels like this so that we can rebuild that which has been torn down. And that is our family structure. That is our family structure. Via enslavement, via post-enslavement, neo-enslavement, I call it. Colonialism, neo-colonialism. The family structure is torn asunder. Your baby sold right from your womb. And we're still suffering from that. Right down to the welfare systems, right down to mass incarceration, right down to having our young people shot down in the streets. What impact do you think that has on lineage? You know, we can't have lofty ideas about it. We gotta face the world and see it for what it is, if we're gonna make it a better place for our children. Thank you.
I just want to take a brief moment to quickly go back over just some tangible things. Because when we read, when we study, these things can be, we embrace concepts. We have to take things in that manner from the conceptual and transfer it into the actual, okay? And if we think about ourselves as a people, we've been doing that for millennia. Grandma made sure dinner was on the table every day, okay? Grandma might not have told you she loved you, but she put food on the table every day, okay? So there is a tangible expression to the things that we do. So when we talk about building lineages, there should be a tangible reflection of that lineage. And it doesn't matter whether it is your religion or if it's your passion, whatever it might be. But there should be certain things that happen. One, decision. The other two brothers that came in the panel before us, he said, the one brother said, I made a decision. I took an oath. And in making that decision, based on the decision, it then becomes a dedication. Ifa says that it takes 2 feet to wear down the path to make the path smooth. That means you have to go at it with your total self. Okay? And with that comes a discipline. And from that discipline comes the word disciple. And there has to be devotion. And with that, then there is a forward movement that you build upon. And it doesn't make a difference whether it is religion. It could be Ifa. It could be any religion you could think of. It could be gymnastics. It could be art. It could be music. But when you sit at the feet of someone that's going to hand you something and teach it to you and show it to you, and then you take it on to yourself, and then you begin to work with it and try and build and try and find your way with it. And then, even by accident, one day you realize you just might have it. But that comes with the other word, work. We have to put the work in. Otherwise, there'll be no, this thing you talk about, there'll be no lineage. And then once you do those things, you pass it on. But in order to pass something on, you have to hold it yourself.
I think we got some pretty great insights in there. Yes? Yes. All right. So I want us to, as we're talking about family lineage and from the African spiritual tradition, I want us to take a minute to see if we have a few questions for our audience. I have a microphone here in the middle. If anybody has a question, that this will be a great time to ask. Baba Karade obviously has written several books and is, the progenitor of this lineage, and so it would be a great person to ask about that kind of development if you have some insights, some further insights you'd like to give us. Anybody? Any questions?
Come on now. Let's talk about it.
That's what we're here for. We don't say everybody got to agree. That's not what the point is. The point is to have dialogue. Oftentimes we're reticent to have dialogue because we don't want to say something that is going to offend someone or step on somebody's toes. But it's about how you do that, right? So sometimes we have dialogue about things we disagree on, and it's not about, we've come from a tradition, right, those in academia and other places, where we often want to attack each other as opposed to have a dialogue. So the point here is that we want to be able to have dialogue about what this is and where we're headed. So if anybody has questions, this is the time. If not, we'll move on. But yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andre. I'm a Ruby Ochichi. My question to you is, speaking about family, we're all over the place within our own individual communities, at work, in the hood, as they say. And we really don't speak to one another. But for people of knowledge, people who are trying to make this change, how can we go about sharing a sense of family with people who do not know what family is? Now, I know that people say, well, you have to have that Buddha within you, you can go chant, you can do this, but within this tradition, what should we focus on in this day and time?
Presentation. Presentation is
Can you put a light on something?
that's what we need to focus on. And I say this for a number of reasons, but I'm going to attempt to narrow it down. Back to an account. I was reading the other day about how poorly our students are doing in the school system, how low the proficiency levels of reading are, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as an educator, that affects me deeply. As an elder in the community, that affects me deeply. As a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, that affects me deeply, right? And the major responses, rebuttals to these kind of statements are, well, hey, more should be done in the home. Don't depend on the schools, do it at home. I pose the question, well, what if the people at home didn't know how to do it? What if their proficiency levels were low based on all types of causes? So how are you going to pass it on to the children? How are you going to interact with others with a somewhat academic state of mind? We're reading, we're discussing. Now let's transfer that over to how will we then feel a sense of family? You see, we already know that information like money spirals out of our community very quickly. Yes, it does. Now, taking that into consideration, how I present myself from my guard to the basis of my conversations, and brothers and sisters, you know, and people of all walks of life, then gather around what it is that we're talking about. You see what I'm saying? Where is it that you're coming from that I feel a kindred to, that I feel some kind of connection to? Now, we would like to say our blood family should be. We would like to say that people who even share our beliefs and our thoughts would be there. But unfortunately, that's hardly ever the case. You want to be family, then have something that you know people are seeking, and that is a way. A way. My family became the Caraways. My family became greater than blood. My family became greater than the thought, greater than my past. And the children born into this family now carry the wisdom of this family. And so family becomes how we present ourselves, what it is that we are discussing. How do we contain this information, this ashe? Okay? How do we contain it? Well, we continue to present it in a non-threatening, but yet not weak, in an ever-expansive, but yet not confusing. And we set examples. That's how we do. And not every family has to be large. You see, we're more about quality than quantity. Not every person in a culture has to be the farmers. But those who are the farmers, they need to make sure that their crops are right so that everyone else. Hopefully that addresses you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Last question. Yes, sir.
I didn't really come to say anything, but as always, you get surprised sometimes when the enrichment comes from quarters of spaces and times when you don't expect them. First, I want to thank you, young man, for doing this, and then you're doing this consistently for 7 years. And looking forward to next year, I've already texted some suggested presenters that I will share with you in a little while for next year about that. And you had the perfect segue for this segment from your last one, as the younger brothers were just talking about their relationships with their daughters and what. And as I was walking out, that was my 15-year-old on the phone asking about her coming into this world and how that played out, because her mother was having some issues with that and her memory. That's a long story. I was explaining to the young brother, Brother Carradine has been a quiet groundbreaker in this tradition for a long time. Because he, just humbly just did what he did, walking that walk. And I always wanted to ask you, Brother Carradine, because you also, as the younger brothers were talking about how they were confronting the apparent non-Africanity of Buddhism, or trying to figure out how to center themselves in that with their Africanity. I always wanted to ask you how you were able to reconcile the embracing of this incredible traditions from which we spring, with at the same time you have a law enforcement background. And that's quite a gap to try and walk. And you did it. You quietly did it. And I never heard you really address that challenge. That's a hell of a challenge, right? So if you want to, you can consider sharing that, because those of us who will have to deal with this masculine energy and all of its demands, we need to really be clear about what that demands of us.
Thank you so much for bringing up such an inspirational question. And I know that I remember you, and I want to take this opportunity to call off a few names. I want to mention Frederica Bay. I want to mention Dr. Linda Jeffries, because during the BCAP era, you all were on the ground with us. Y'all saw me. You knew where I was. You knew what we did. We were there on the ground fighting for our people. What was happening in the background, though, was Ifa. And when I began to dig deep in myself and search and try to find answers about what's going on with me, because I was troubled, because I wanted to know. I wanted to know self. I wanted to know what was going on around me. Why were these things happening to me? Ifa provided those answers and so much more. One of the things that I didn't mention, one of the things that shattered my mind, that made me begin my search, was actually the Rodney King beating. Because it was from watching that video every night that I said, they are beating him like he is a slave. I said, well, if they're going to beat us like we African, we might as well be African. And at that particular time, I was studying Tantric Buddhism with an enlightened master. And it was when I left a meditation session with him in a room full of people, was when I said, I want to be African. And several months later, the change began to happen in unusual ways. I say all of that to say this, that because of all of these experiences and the experiences I had in law enforcement, I began to see that I'm empowered to advocate for my people. That's what protect and serve meant. I looked copping these storms. I looked around, all I saw was us. And if it wasn't people that look like me, you live here. So this is where I'm protecting and serving. So I have to take this authority and give it back to you. But I have to give it back to you in a way that serves you, that protects you. The law simply gives a vehicle of saying when to do what and how. But the concept of protect and serve was what I had to do. And so I ended up having to address issues either on the ground, within my agency, within myself. And when those changes began to happen, that was how I bridged the gap. And then I found out that my ancestors were warrior chiefs. And that's when I realized why I had to become a police officer, why I was successful in this path, why was the warrior spirit so great in me. It was because it was them. And I was simply becoming a reflection in the modern day of who they were. So I hope that answers your question. That's kind of how I bridge that gap.
So, any other questions? If there's no other questions, we're going to take this time because to take a few minutes and answer the question and any closing thoughts you may have.
I'm moved to add what Dr. Kabir stated, because I was a teacher in the work, SARS, heard established businesses right in our community, and now a professor here at Essex County College. Our journeys overlap, and I'm sure the same can be said for many of you. We're pillars within our community. Now, how strong we are, and where we're set to keep balance and structure is not just a material statement as if I'm a teacher, I'm a police officer, I'm a social worker. And as I stated in my introduction, perspective means everything. How do you perceive yourself becomes, dare I say, the greater statement beyond what you are as viewed on a material plane. And this becomes the segue to, the connection to, the pathway to spirituality. Embracing spirituality has everything to do with embracing self-respect. Embracing the spirituality of we as a people has everything to do with how we see ourselves and interact with one another as kindred spirits. You see? So regardless of the position, because I've had, the brothers, step up to me with, well, why are you a teacher in the public school system, and all that kind of thing. The public school system is no place for the real brothers. And I'm like, well, what is a real place for the real brothers? Prison? Do I have to go through that in order to be a part of the brotherhood? If that's the case, no, thank you. Okay? But that's the perception, that's the mind twist. That in order for you to be a part of a lineage, you have to go through certain rites of passage. And I, reversing that process, say, there are other rites of passage that are available to you, my brothers. There are other rites of passages that are available to you, my sisters. There are other rites of passages, and they all stem from not who we've been trained to look at ourselves as, but as people who have the capacity to see beyond it, to travel back 400, 600, 1,000, 1,200 years ago to say, we're not what you're trying to make us into. We're just not. And you can keep flashing the pictures and do your mind-bending games and set up the imagery, the Sistine Chapel, and you can have all kinds of names for us, coming out of Constantine. You can do all of that to us, but you can't take away our spirit. You can't. And we're always going to see ourselves as more than that. And because that creates a problem in terms of controlling us, the war is going to be continuing. So again, adding on to what my brother is saying, how you perceive yourself has everything to do with your level of spirituality. Your level of spirituality, and even more important, if I dare say, embracing the spirituality of others. And I'll use the term Ashiwaka again, because there is a concept of it that's been alive in our tradition for eons. And the way to maintain that and strengthen it is based on the alashe, codes of conduct, codes of interaction. You can be, but until you're initiated in some form or fashion into the understanding, you turn the alabed, unknowing. Not unknowing of math and literature and sciences, but unknowing of yourself and your relationship with others, whom you embrace as kindred spirit, whom you embrace as man.
In this, we have the honor of having Oluwo, how do you pronounce his name?
Oluwo Bawoni Awoi Fakule Egungwe.
Thank you very much. So we have two Ifakules here today. We have the Philadelphia Ifakule and we have the Harlem Ifakule. So we're honored to have Baba here with us today. He came up here and we're honored to have his presentation. This is a really important piece for us to talk about because in our community we deal so much with mental health and the challenges of mental health. And so for us to have the ability to talk about how our spiritual systems influence and can help us to understand mental health is powerful. So I'm going to ask him to say a few words of introduction like everyone else has done, but then to kind of go into in-depthly what does it mean to talk about African spirituality and mental health. And without further ado, I ask you to give Baba a round of applause. Welcome him here to the table.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. Bendición menores y mejores. Good afternoon. My name is Olu Bawani Awoy Fakunle Ekumbemi. I'm a Baba Dao, from tradition. I came to this tradition, fortunately, because of two cousins that lived in New York. One was a dancer with Al Nelly, and the other one was a very prominent drummer in the New York scene. And in the summer, I used to come up and spend the summers with my cousins, so I got drugged all over the place. So I ended up going in and out of Oldham houses, Africana houses, Ifa houses, Cuban houses. Okay. Dunham houses, learning dance, learning drum, learning tradition. I came to this tradition in '66, I was 9. And I have been studying and learning, and I will remain a student of E5. I will remain in E.I.O. before E5 until I leave this world. E5 teaches us that every day there's something else to learn, so we never arrive. We spend our lives arriving. One of the biggest things that I've seen sitting on the mat over the years with clients coming for readings is trauma. The number one thing that impacts us, that drives us, that moves us, is trauma. For those of you who read Dr. DeGroove's book, Post-African Slave Syndrome, there's a spiritual component with that. And African Americans in the clinical community, in the psychological community, are realizing and have realized and are moving to connect up how trauma, African spirituality, how this all works. In a word, Egun, ancestors. There were a number of discussions here today, and everybody's touching on the same thing. How do we get back to self? How do we get to center? How do we develop? How do we awaken? How do we connect? In the word, Egun. Having annual small meals in your home. Everybody gets together and bring out all the photos of all the members of your family that have passed. Having a dinner, doing small things like that to bring the family together, to begin to communicate. At the same time, to discuss angst between family members. Sometimes fights ensue, but where you weren't talking, you are now talking. The common theme through all African traditions, whether it's Ghana, Benin, Akan, Ifa, Vodou, Ag, the common thread is working with Egun. 2017, my junior wife was invited to Black psychologist meeting. They have a monthly get-together in Philly. And to talk about Black psychology and advances and what they need to do to develop it further in the community. This one year that I went, the discussion was led by a Muslim who has his PhD in psychology. And the room was by and large Muslim. Clinical therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. And they were trying to figure out, how do we take Black psychology our clients when we're realizing that beyond what's happening with them clinically, beyond what's happening with them in terms of the mental health component, beyond what's happening with them psychologically, there's a trauma that we just can't get to. And so they began to look at, and they were discussing in this meeting, how we could bring, or how they could bring Islam into therapy. And I'm sitting, I'm listening, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, they on it. Come on, come on, come on. And so the presenter said he had sat with his imam, and he was talking with his imam, and his imam was talking about the importance of Islam, prayer, worship, to help to begin to heal into men. And the thing that they were missing was the ancestral piece. And this is where I want to come back to this, because I'm talking about ego as the core component in mental health. I've spent time in Nigeria, Ghana, Benin, Mali, Cuba, Trinidad, New York, North Carolina, DC, California. But coming back to Africa, you could be Episcopalian. You could be Muslim. There are 2 Buddhist temples in Nigeria now. Well, not now. They've been there for, well, to my knowledge, the oldest one, I think, maybe 15, 16 years. When it comes time to perform a festival, no matter what tradition, what religious focus, what vantage point that particular religious person is coming from, Africans, traditional, indigenous Africans, regardless of what they are referring to religiously, go right back to their core traditions. They don't do anything until they first satisfy their ancestors. All of these discussions are being had today. Identifying self, connecting with self. What is that? Core value. The core value of family. Extended family. What is that common thread for everybody in this room? We share the same ancestors. Beyond political divide, gender divide, socioeconomic, academics, forget about it. We share the same ancestor. So that in everything that you do, church, synagogue, masjid, Buddhist temple. Interesting enough, I'm gonna come back to that, let me not. First and foremost, you should always, always, always keep your ancestors in front of you. They're not behind you, your back is turned. They are not behind you, it is your back that is turned. If we understand that the lessons that we do not learn, we are doomed to repeat, then we understand just how ahead of the game our ancestors are. The statement in of itself tells you clearly, you're the one behind. I'm the one who's lying. They precede us and they follow us. Coming back to the divinations. That's the end of that. Moving back to the divinations. When people come to my mat for divinations, first thing I do after I open with that shoe, regardless of whatever it is, first thing I do after I open with that shoe is go straight to Abel and see what they have to say. Abel can talk about finance. They can talk about investments. They can talk about stock. They can talk about the right school for your child, the best day to travel. They can talk about their views on the president. They can help critique your dissertation for your PhD, if you include them. It's not a styrofoam cup of little water on the ground. It's here. In everything you do on first and foremost, that first thought is them. So when we talk about trying to identify self, when we talk about who I am and what, you want an answer, you want to understand, you want to connect. Learn about ancestral traditions. Follow my young man, whatever. The first thing, as I said before, the first thing that traditional Africans do, I've seen them file out of the church in Nigeria. File out of the big open air outdoor churches, file right out of the church. When the festival goes on, I'll come to Doom Doom, to Target Drums, I'll come to Shake Race, I'll come to Yo Go-Go, straight to their own shrine. Because whatever, they may be 3 or 4 generations Christian, 3 or 4 generations Muslims, first and foremost, they are Yoruba. There is not one African tradition in the entirety of Africa that is not steeped in Egum. Whatever they call it, however they approach it. No major event happens in traditional Africa that does not begin with Egum, with getting the ancestors permission, getting the ancestors support. Not just sacrificing something and satisfying, talking with them. So that when my clients come to my mat and I sit, we may not make it to E5 in that discussion because Egum has been talking for 3 hours. Egum has been talking for 4 hours. Talking about clinical things. I've had clients who come who have, one in particular, she was diagnosed with manic depression. They had her on 3 different prescriptions and it was making her just absolutely crazy. And she wanted to get off the medicine. She wanted to get off the meds. So she talked to someone mentioned her come to me, Christian. But she felt like she needed some kind of religious something, you know, maybe it's religion, maybe I need something. And that comes back to what the 4 brothers here today have been discussing, and that is the need, the hunger of the spirit. The hunger of the soul. Whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian, whether you're Buddhist, that hunger. It's all the same hunger. That need, quintessentially, it's all the same need. And so we sat down, read Egum. First thing Egum said is, don't give up the meds. Stay on your medication. In addition to that, they sent her to the river once a month. At the end of that reading, here comes the punchline. Her great-grandmother was raped. Her mother was raped. And I'm looking, and I'm looking, and I'm looking, and I asked her, did she have this kind of experience? And she said no. But the strange thing is, every once in a while, something comes and takes me in my sleep. This spirit had been attacking the women in this particular woman's life. In addition to the grandmother, this spirit, what comes down, this spirit had been attacking women in this woman's life for about 5 generations. Now I want you to listen carefully. This is trauma. Now understand, she's going to a therapist. You understand what I'm saying? She's going to a therapist. Therapist says, oh, okay, you know, post-traumatic depression. Okay, I'll take what, let me take 3 of these. Take 4 of those. Take 1 of them. We're gonna set up a schedule for you, every other Tuesday. Come in, we're gonna sit down and talk. In fairness, if you're Western trained, what other methods do you have except pushing medication? So I'm not hating on the Western piece. Okay, let's not do that. Some folks need medication. There's a few days I need medication. Okay? I'm looking around to see if I can borrow somebody's Xanax, you know? I don't think I can make it today. You know? I'll call Lee Friday because like, you need Xanax. So let's not hate on the Western piece because that's important. But let us be mindful that in that Western approach, that we're not stabilizing the trauma as opposed to removing it. So you have black psychologists saying, well, you know, you need to do something. I'm kind of moving all over the place. Is everybody following where I'm going? Okay, because forgive me, because I have a little bit of time, so there's a couple points, so it's kind of bullets, and all right? Let's go back to the discussion at the black psychologists get together, and it's a Muslim who's presenting. So the reference point for them is Islam, which is African. So they're trying to connect this, realizing that something's missing in what we're doing. And they're trying to look at the religious component and seeing how to integrate it. As I said, I'm smiling, I'm listening, because actually I'm digging where they're trying to get to. So I'm waiting to see, you know, it's like that good joke and you just wait for the punchline. I'm waiting to see if somebody's how they're gonna bridge it. And I'm watching to see how they're gonna do it. They're not quite able to bridge it. So, I'm from the school that children should be seen and not heard. I'm 62 years old. When I'm in the midst of a group of people, if I'm not invited, I'm the child who sits. And I don't speak. Children should be seen and not heard. That's something we should learn and apply more. That conversation about us arguing, if we defer to each other a lot more, I think a lot of that would go to the wayside. Side note, back to the point. So, every once in a while, the presenter we kind of eye lock, every once in a while. So it's like maybe an hour and a half into the discussion. He just kind of looks over at me and he says, Assalamu alaikum, brother. I don't know. It's like, would you care to And I said, well, brother, I'm not, you know, this is a Muslim discussion. This is out of my depth, so I'm a non-Muslim. So, you know, unless I'm invited, I'm fine where I'm at. So he invites me into the discussion. So the first thing I say to them, I said, what you're looking at is not a religious frame. And we must, as black people and as children of color, not just black people, children of color, we must be very mindful of those framings where religion comes into play. Because now we're talking about a convergence away from who we are internally, who we are spiritually, who we are economically and socially. That convergence is asking for us to ascribe to an institute, a set of parameters, a dynamic, a constitute that may not be consistent with who we are. So now we have to embrace this different thing, this different approach. So it's a socialization, it's a convergence that brings about another level of socialization that we have to be mindful of. And I brought it back to say to him what I just said to you a few minutes before, and that is, wherever you go, and I'm going to speak to Nigeria because Nigeria is the thing that I've spent a lot of years, is a place that I've spent a lot of years in. No matter what the religious references of that Yoruba person, when it comes time for festival, when it comes time for the funerals, when it comes time for childbirth, when it comes time for those core things to occur within that community, all of the Christianity and Islam, respectively, you don't see that. What you see are Yorubas calling to their ancestors. They're pouring libation, they're bringing out Igun, they're bringing out the Orisha of that town, and they're connecting up all of who they are with their indigenous selves. Side note, on this note of trauma, we're not the only ones that suffer trauma. There's a lot of trauma going on in Nigeria. They suffer trauma the way we suffer trauma. The difference is they have a reinforcement through the community, through that cultural dynamic, through that community dynamic that helps to kind of reinforce and steady them on. They have that infrastructure that we don't have here. But in terms of trauma, they have it as well. But the difference is they have those support mechanisms. You have your annual festivals. Do more things with Egun. Brother asked, what do you do within the family situation? How do you bring them every couple months? Have a meal, prepare a meal for one of your deceased family members. Just everybody get together, play James Brown, play Sam Cooke, dance, drink a little beer, talk a little bit. I don't care if you're Muslim or Christian or whatever. Talk to them. Let them know what's going on with the family. Don't just have these festivals, don't have these get-togethers and that's it. Talk to them. Brother was talking about chanting. That same mechanism that he was referring to in terms of chanting to awaken self, to align self, to accept what is, and to be able to pass through that. That same mechanism is the mechanism you apply with everything, with your ancestors. You don't need to be initiated. You don't need to stop going to church. And let me stop there for a second here. Now, some of you are probably going to run me out of here for saying this, but that's okay. I got my sneakers on. I got my sneakers on. This is not a theocentric statement. This is not a theocentric statement. But if you talk to a traditional priest, pretty much anywhere in Africa, about what constitutes, what defines an Egun, if you give them the example of Jesus, mortal being, passed through his life, suffered, died, transcended self. Whatever term that particular ethnic group uses, I'm going to use the one that's familiar to me. Jesus is an Egun. Christianity is ancestral worship. If you stop and think about that, Christianity is ancestral worship. To add insult to injury, redefined by people outside of our reference, our spiritual worldview, outside of our cultural worldview, outside of our spiritual worldview, not religion, that's their thing. We don't need a construct to bring us to devote God. We've already connected. We got disconnected and reconnected their way. But if you stop and think about it a minute, I'm worshiping an ancestor. So now if an African comes along and says, you must worship your ancestors, why you go, You're worshiping Jesus. And if we're going to set the record straight, who knows that one of these brothers in here may look exactly like Jesus and Jesus look exactly like him. So what's the problem with worshiping a black man? Where I'm going with this is that trauma. Because the first impact of trauma for black people, the main impact of trauma, the primary impact of trauma was when our souls were ripped from us. How did that happen? Let me give you an example. The Vodun Festival in Ouida, Benin. The king comes. Again, what is the first thing they have to do? What's the first thing they have to do? They got to satisfy the ancestors. So the first thing they have to do is satisfy the ancestors. The king comes. They have all the essentials that they need to have. Longboat, king goes out offshore. He has to. And they give this offering in the Atlantic. Now, on the front end of that, we appreciate the importance of that. He's feeding Abram, he's feeding the ancestors, propitiating. He's apologizing for his ancestors. Because for those students of the history of slavery, know that Benin made a lot of money. The Africans, not just the Europeans, the Africans made a lot of money. So the reason for this business of the king having to go out is to apologize for the actions of his ancestors that resulted those souls being in that situation. But here's the other side of this piece that doesn't get discussed. Listen carefully. While he is propitiating and he is apologizing to the ancestors for the actions of his ancestors and for the actions of the ancestors of that town, he is at the same time making sure that those who are still angry, are calm to such a degree that they don't come back and take reprisal. This is not opinion. How many of you have seen angry black children? Just, why are you angry? Okay, listen carefully. Listen carefully. He is propitiated and he is satisfied those angry. They throw a pellet, the owls. They call that tradition ifa, tomato. They throw a pellet. And Bonda, and do Boko, the ancestors are satisfied, we can proceed with the festivities of this year. But they've also calmed down the revenge that the ancestors can take. Imagine you being in a space where you're screaming at the top of your lungs. You are in anguish for a millennium. And no one is hearing you. And no one is paying attention to you. And no one is aware, and you're screaming, you're screaming, you're screaming. They are propitiating on that side, and we're not propitiating on this side. Where do you think that anguish is going to come to? And as we understand, Egun, that spirit moves from one body to the next, to the next, to the next. Is it no wonder why we have such rage? Is anybody understanding what I'm saying? Yes, sir. So, if we understand Black rage, we read Joyce DeGruy's book, Dr. Joyce DeGruy's book, Post-African Slave Syndrome. What are we looking at? We're looking at intergenerational rage. Moving from one person to another person, to another person, to another person. And because we don't have those facilities in place, they end up on the Western medical side trying to get some answers to what is going on. Whether it's realized as, again, multi-personality dysfunction, depression, sexual disorder, alcoholism, drug addiction. A lot of that gets triggered because we're not working with ourselves at that core level, as the two Buddhist brothers were talking about earlier. But in addition to that, taking nothing from it at all. But in addition to that, we must understand how impacted we are by lineage. We talk about lineage. How impacted we are by that lineage of anger and anguish. If we look deeper into slavery, moving past being angry about what has happened, and look at the mechanics of slavery, let us also look at strategic techniques that were implemented to remove the soul from the individual and make them an animal. If you look at the procedures, having confinement beneath a church, so through the concrete, you're down in this dark place, and you can hear people singing Christian hymns above you, and no one can hear you. Just that whole process. We're talking about solitary confinement. That's solitary confinement, thank you. Look at that as a technique to rip away the soul from the person, to take away their humanity, to reduce them. Understand 1 million people dying like that. And those spirits are still. Is it no wonder when they come to the psychologist? Is it no wonder when they go to the drug dealer? Is it no wonder when they run to religion for some relief? Is it no wonder what oftentimes is the catalyst for that? Spiritual health is mental health. is mental health. Spiritual health is what? Spiritual health is mental health. And where do we begin to heal? We begin by healing our ancestors. If you do not heal your ancestors, you yourself are not going to heal. And where you think you're straight and you forget about them, it's short-lived. I see this on the clinical side, I see it on the EPI side, and incidentally, it's all clinical, it's all the same thing. We have to begin to work with our aging. We have to begin to work with our ancestors. I'm not talking about ritual performance. You're not to break out in Nevada, have your fancy gele, ton of beads right in it. What was grandmama's favorite meal? Get in the kitchen, somebody cook it. What was Pop-Pop's favorite meal? Somebody get in the kitchen, cook it. I'm gonna call a cousin, and I'm a second cousin, and I'm gonna call, boy used to live next door to my mama, because we still in touch. And we're gonna get together on a Sunday. And we just gonna sit around and talk about what we can remember. You can't appreciate how healing that is. But when you do it on a regular basis, what's a regular basis? Once a month? At the turn of every season? In the church, in the masjid? Again, when we talk about African people, whether they're Muslim, Protestant, Episcopalian, Methodist, when it comes time for these Yorubas to satisfy their ancestors, first and foremost, they're Africans. Which is my next point. If you're still struggling with being African American, there's a reason why you're struggling with being African American. You're African. If you're trying to be African American, make up your mind. Are you over here? Or are you over here? You can't be half and half. Y'all hear me? Stop being afraid of being African. That is part of the trauma right there. Ooh, sorry. That's a part of the trauma right there. Because you have not made up your mind to fully embrace who you are. So that anything can come in, any fire, any style, any drug, any circumstance, any socialization, any religious mechanism can come in and just keep you divided. This is not a theocentric statement. Remember, Africans, Yorubas, when it is time, all of those other pieces are put respectfully in their place. It is, I am Yoruba. And they are going to perform. And they're going to execute. They're going to bring out Egungun. They're going to bring out Igunu. They're going to prepare and make their appropriate sacrifices and offerings. And they're not going to do anything until that is satisfied. Be it a time of Shango, be it a time of Oshun, be it a time of Abatila, be it a time of Yamu, Yamoja, be it a time of Eile. First and foremost, organize your family units. Hey, how about we have an ancestral festival? Hey, let's have a meal for Uncle Harry. Let's everybody get together and have a little meal for Uncle Harry. So whether that offering is with all of the accoutrements traditionally in a traditional frame or if it's something we do here on this side. You need to do that. The other thing that needs to happen, and this is the community. Y'all need to get to the river. Y'all need to get to the Atlantic. You need to get to the Atlantic. You need to get to the ocean. And apologize to them. Don't go asking them for nothing. The same way that they do in Benin, I'm telling you. See, we see the front side of the Benin piece. But we don't understand, and so I'm dropping the dime and I'm telling you what's on the backside of the Benin piece. What's on the backside of that Benin piece is the king, representing all of his lineage, who were contributors to the sell and sale of black lives and putting them on those ships. Black lives even mattered then. We got to deal with the mistakes that we made. White man this, white man that, truth. But we got to deal with the mistakes that we made. We got to deal with the mistakes that we made. If you're talking about dealing with trauma, you need to apologize to yourself. That ancestor in you